book that I've written plays with the issue of how words affect us and transform our lives in many, many ways. The first piece that I'm going to read is from my first story, which is called A Waterfall of Horses. And I think it lays out pretty carefully the kind of themes that I explore in a lot of the other stories to come. How do I explain the word kakteen? Say it out loud. Ka-kteen. The first, a short, sharp thrust of air from the back of your throat. The second, a lift of the tongue and a delicate tangle of tip and teeth. For I mean not what's bound by paper. Once printed, the word is feeble and carries little power. It wrestles with ink and typography and margins, struggling to be what it was originally. Spoken, unwritten, unrecorded. Old, they say, as the first fire. Free to roam the mountains, circle the heath, and fall as rain. We who had no letters with which to etch our history have married our words to music, to mantras that we repeat until lines grow old and wither and fade away, until they are forgotten and there is silence. How do I explain something untraceable, the perfect weapon for a crime, light as fine dust, echoing with alibis, conjuring out of thin air the ugly, the beautiful, the terrifying. Eventually, like all things, it is unfathomable. So how do I explain? Perhaps it's best, as they did in the old days, to tell a story and to also have a conversation on the phone. Okay? Now, I learnt about the word long ago when I was young and had seen no more than 13 winters. In those days, the nights were so cold that frost gathered on our roofs and gardens like snow. That's what the Bilati men said it looked like, for we had never seen snow in all our lives. I'm going to skip ahead to a little further down the story, where there's a conflict between the British soldiers who settle in this remote region in Meghalaya and the people of the village close by. The village council met in the headman's hut and gathered around the heath. I was there to stoke the fire and serve tea spiked with kyat to bolster their ravaged spirits. A muted rebellion ran through the crowd in the room. One young man couldn't contain his anger any longer. Something must be done, he spluttered. Mama San, the headman, sipped his drink in silence. What will we fight them with, he said. A silence fell, broken only by the hiss and crackle of the fire. The Bilati soldiers had guns, while we wielded only primitive swords and shot inadequate wooden arrows. There are enough of us against them, someone shouted. Mama San shook his head. We would lose too many men. Would you have your own brothers slaughtered in vain like chickens? The debate continued for almost an hour, until an old man, whom everyone called the Nonknya, spoke up. Ramba, he said softly, we can fight them with words. Gasps of disbelief and laughter escaped the crowd. Mama San nodded and looked around at his people. We have one weapon, poor as it may seem. The power of Kteen, the word. It is our last resort because it is dishonorable to fight an enemy without giving him a chance to defend himself. That could be corrected, said the old man. We won't strike the men. Then what? Said a man sitting closest to the fire. The old man shook his head. There are other ways to render them powerless. Late that night, my mother and I warmed our hands by a small coal chula. I asked her who the Nongknya was and what he meant by Kten. My mother looked at me and smiled. He is the bearer of the word, the one who performs our rituals and communicates with the gods. The Mem Sahib says she would like to teach me to read and write with something called alphabet that her husband has invented for our language. I explained that we have no need for these things, books and letters and writings, and that everything we know about the world is in the sound of our words. Kikten. It has the power to do good. Like what? I asked quickly. Like your grandfather, she replied. He could heal a person by uttering a mantra. Once I cut my hand while splitting bamboo, and he held it and spoke into it, and the bleeding stopped. People would come to him if they had fish bones stuck in their throat. He'd chant the words and rub their neck with oil and ash, and the bone would be gone. He told me there are mantras that hungry travelers can chant for an animal to appear before them so they can feed. Mantras to bring clean water from a river or fruit from a tree. The embers in the chula were dying. But can it also be used to bring harm? I asked. My mother nodded. Is that what Nongknya and Mama San will use on the Bilati men? I asked. She pushed herself away from the fire. Who can say, she said, what mantras the Nongknya knows?